Picture this, all right? You are in Paris.
Oh, setting the scene.
Yeah. The date is May 29th, 1913.
Mm-hmm.
You are sitting inside the newly built, incredibly opulent Théâtre des Champs-Élysées.
Right.
And I want you to really visualize this space. It is a masterpiece of modern architecture for the time. All clean lines, gleaming marble, plush velvet everywhere.
Very high society.
Exactly. The air in the theater is thick, almost heavy with anticipation. You can, smell the expensive floral perfumes, the pomade, the starch of tuxedo shirts.
Just absolute peak Edwardian luxury.
Right. You can hear the constant low rustle of heavy silk gowns as the most elite members of European high society take their seats. You're there for the premiere of a new ballet by Igor Stravinsky called The Rite of Spring.
A legendary night.
So the house lights dim, the audience goes dead silent, the curtain rises, and then the music starts.
And right away, they know something is up.
Right away, something is deeply, deeply wrong. A lone bassoon begins to play, but it's playing in a register so uncomfortably high it sounds like a total different strangulated instrument.
It's like it's choking.
Yes, and it's not graceful at all.
Yeah.
It's weird, it's dissonant, the rhythm is jagged and unpredictable, almost like it's, fighting itself.
Which is completely jarring for an audience expecting a nice, pretty waltz.
Totally. Then you look at the dancers on stage. They aren't doing what ballet dancers are supposed to do. There are no delicate leaps, no defying gravity, no elegant lines.
None of that floating aesthetic.
No, they're hunched over. Their shoulders are rigidly pulled up to their ears. Their toes are pointed sharply inward like pigeon-toed, and their knees are bent.
Just entirely anti-classical.
And they are shuffling, and then suddenly they begin violently stomping the floorboards in unison.
Right.
And within minutes, literally minutes into the performance, the polite, refined audience around you goes completely ballistic. I am talking sheer, unadulterated chaos.
It was a literal riot. I mean, when we look at the historical accounts of that night, the sheer scale of the violence is almost hard to comprehend. We aren't just talking about a few boos or hisses from the balcony.
No. We were talking about people in evening gowns and tails throwing actual physical punches at each other.
Right, in a theater.
The velvet chairs in this pristine new theater are being ripped up and thrown through the air. There is actually a documented account of one highly aristocratic, well-dressed woman who gets so viscerally enraged by the performance on stage that she pulls out a long hat pin and attempts to violently stab her neighbor in the adjoining seat.
Which is just, it's wild. A hat pin.
A hat pin. The orchestra is playing so loud and the crowd is screaming so loud that the choreographer has to stand on a chair in the wings just shouting out numbers to the dancers so they can keep time.
They couldn't even hear the music over the screaming.
Exactly. The police are called in to quell the riot, and they have to physically drag 40 screaming troublemakers out into the Parisian streets.
It's just unbelievable.
And the arguments that night are so deeply personal, so heated, that actual duels, like formal duels with swords and pistols, are challenged and fought the very next morning at dawn.
Over dance.
Over a ballet. The French artist Valentine Gros-Hugo was actually sitting in the theater that night. And when she wrote about it later, she didn't describe it as a bad theatrical review. She noted that the theater seemed to be, quote, struck by an earthquake.
Which is such a telling, evocative way to describe what was actually happening on a cultural level. It wasn't just an artistic disagreement.
Yeah.
The foundational psychological bedrock of that audience was quite literally shaking.
Exactly. And that visceral, violent reaction immediately raises a massive core mystery for this deep dive. Why?
Right? Why care that much?
Why does moving our limbs to a specific beat or watching someone else move their limbs in an unfamiliar way have the raw power to make civilized, highly educated people throw chairs and challenge each other to sword fights?
It seems so disproportionate.
It really does. You might think of dance as just something you do at a wedding reception when the DJ plays a song you like, or maybe a highly aesthetic performance you watch on a stage from a polite distance.
Just entertainment, basically.
Exactly. But to find out what really happened in that Paris theater, we had to look at a staggering amount of data. Today's stack of sources ranges from the carvings on ancient rock walls to incredibly dense Indian spiritual treatises.
Oh, we go deep today.
We really do. We've got the anthropological field notes of Haitian Vodou ceremonies all the way to modern global heritage documents.
It's a huge timeline.
And what all of these sources reveal is something profound. They show us that human motion is not a pastime. It is actually our oldest, most deeply rooted architectural framework for sheer survival, for spiritual communication, and for storing our cultural memory.
Yes.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand why a ballet could bypass the intellects and strike the nervous system so violently in 1913, we have to rewind the clock way, way back to the very beginning.
We really do. So, to set the stage for this deep dive, I want you to visualize a vast, constantly shifting landscape in your mind's eye.
I'm picturing it.
We are going to start deep inside ancient rock shelters. We're going to move across the blistering, dusty trade routes of the Silk Road, and we will eventually find ourselves back in bustling modern theaters.
A full world tour.
Exactly. Because what the combined historical and anthropological evidence from our sources definitively proves is that dance was never, ever merely a diversion.
Right.
Long before humans possessed written language, long before the invention of the alphabet or the wheel, movement was our primary piece of technology.
Wait, technology.
Yes, technology. It was documented as a literal physiological method of healing, and it was the absolute earliest, most sophisticated form of social communication we possessed as a species.
That is so wild. I want you, the listener, to pause and think about the very last time you moved your body to music. Maybe you were just alone in your kitchen making coffee, or maybe you were packed into a crowded concert.
Just tapping your foot.
Right, that immediate unconscious instinct to tap your foot, to nod your head, to sway your hips. We are going to decode the vast hidden history locked inside those exact physical instincts.
Because it's vital to understand that before dance could start riots in 20th century Paris, it had to serve a functional, literal life or death purpose for early humanity.
We are talking prehistoric daily survival.
Precisely. If we look at the oldest archaeological evidence we have, we can trace the origins of formalized rhythmic movement back to places like the Bhimbetka rock shelters in central India.
Okay, how old are we talking?
We are looking at cave paintings that date back roughly 10,000 years.
Wow.
And what the archaeologists see on these rock walls is fascinating. We see vivid imagery of humans gathering in circles, linking arms, and dancing, painted directly alongside carved stories of the most crucial elements of existence.
Like what kind of elements?
Hunting, childbirth, and burials.
So looking at the layout of these paintings, it wasn't just a casual, hey, we successfully killed a mammoth today, let's have a party and dance.
Not at all.
The dancing was woven into the very fabric of how they survived the harshness of the world.
Absolutely. In these prehistoric hunter-gatherer societies, dance was deeply, inextricably intertwined with shamanic spiritualism. It was the literal architecture for community bonding and survival.
Right.
When hunters prepared to go out into dangerous terrain, they didn't just sharpen their spears. They used rhythmic, highly patterned movement as a foundational practice for hunting rituals.
They were basically warming up, physically and spiritually.
Exactly. Through these dances, they believed they were actively negotiating a complex spiritual relationship with the animals they sought to hunt.
Oh, that makes sense.
Or, conversely, they were performing highly specific movements to celebrate a successful hunt, physically returning energy to the earth to ensure that the delicate cosmic balance of predator and prey was maintained.
It was a physical transaction with the universe.
A literal transaction, yes.
And what the sources show is that as human civilizations settled down, as they developed agriculture and grew infinitely more complex, that primal rhythm didn't just fade away into history.
No, it just adapted.
It didn't become obsolete. It just got highly organized and heavily institutionalized. Which brings us to the banks of the Nile River.
Ancient Egypt.
Ancient Egypt, starting around 3300 BC. I was looking through the sources we gathered on this, and the timeline stopped me in my tracks.
It's incredible.
The evidence shows that dance in Egypt was absolutely vital to the state, particularly when it came to the most important transition of all, which is the transition from life to death.
The Egyptian funerary processions are a perfect, striking example of this functional, utilitarian approach to movement.
Right.
When we examine tomb paintings and hieroglyphics from the pre-dynastic period onward, we see that dance in this context wasn't just a display of emotional grief for the deceased, the way we might think of weeping or mourning today.
It wasn't just about being sad.
No, it was a functional, mechanical ritual. It was an engineering process designed to ensure the deceased's safe, secure passage through the terrifying labyrinth of the underworld.
Wait, so they weren't just expressing sadness. They were literally doing a specific sequence of movements to appease the specific gods guarding the afterlife.
Exactly. They were appealing directly to massive, powerful deities like Hathor.
Hathor, right.
Yes, who was often viewed as the guardian or the mistress of the underworld. Hathor's favor could literally assist or hinder the soul's perilous journey. So the dancing had to be flawless.
You could mess it up.
You really couldn't. It couldn't just be improvisational movement. It was executed by highly trained, highly organized professional groups known as the Kenner.
The Kenner. Let's talk about them, because the sources are very clear that these weren't just random villagers pulled from the morning crowd.
Far from it. These were specialized elite troops affiliated with specific temples or massive funerary complexes. They were led by a director or an overseer of dance.
Like an ancient artistic director?
Basically, yeah. And what is structurally fascinating about the Kenner is the strict gender separation in early Egyptian dance.
Oh, right. I read about this.
Yeah, men and women are almost never depicted dancing together in the iconography of the period. They operated in parallel, highly distinct spheres of movement.
And the physical technique itself evolved over thousands of years, too.
Yeah.
The sources break down how the actual physical virtuosity changed across the different massive eras of ancient Egypt.
It's a huge leap in skill over time.
It really is. Like in the Old Kingdom, the movements are depicted as very formal, very restrained, almost rigid. You have things like the triff, which was a very specific pair dance representing symmetrical harmony and cosmic order.
Very controlled.
But then as we transition into the Middle Kingdom, suddenly it's like someone turned up the kinetic dial.
We see an explosion of physical dynamism. We see the introduction of the chicks, which is explicitly an acrobatic dance.
Acrobatic.
Yes. Suddenly the tomb paintings are showing us dancers executing massive leaps, heavy stamping, and highly complex acrobatic flips.
Doing flips at a funeral.
Exactly. The movement becomes a display of sheer physical mastery over the divine landscape.
And by the New Kingdom, it completely peaks. The dancers are doing rapid cartwheels, full forward flips. The sources even make a point to mention that the New Kingdom movements drawn on these walls are considered the early, direct precursors to the modern pirouette and the arabesque that we see in classical European ballet today.
Yep.
They were mapping out the ultimate extremes of human flexibility and balance thousands of years before the Europeans ever claimed to have invented it.
But what's fascinating here is the deep intersection of these sacred, divine movements with raw martial violence.
Oh, man, yeah.
If we really look at the mechanisms of human history, martial arts and death rituals were truly the twin birthplaces of codified dance.
Yes. I want to spend some time on this because the Egyptian tatib blew my mind when I read about it.
The tatib is an incredible living example of this evolution. It originated approximately 5,000 years ago, right around the 5th dynasty of King Sahir.
And it wasn't a dance at first, right?
Not at all. When it was first created, it was a highly lethal, brutally efficient stick-fighting martial art used by the state to train Egyptian soldiers for actual bloody military combat.
But over the millennia, something incredible happens. It evolves. The tatib goes from being a literal military drill used to kill people to becoming a formalized performance ritual, and eventually becomes a joyous folk dance.
Yeah, the dance of the stick.
Right, which is still associated today with the Satidi community of Upper Egypt and performed at big celebrations, like weddings.
It's amazing.
It is taking the lethal skills of close-quarters combat and sublimating them into social celebration. I was trying to think of a modern parallel.
Oh, like what?
Well, I guess it's kind of like how modern military drill teams will take loaded rifles and spin them in these gorgeous, highly choreographed routines in the air.
That's a great example.
Or even how modern marching bands evolved from the strict regimented movement of military infantry formations. You take the extreme precision and the inherent threat of violence, and you magically transmute it into art. But why do we do that?
Right.
What is the psychological mechanism that makes humans want to turn the thing that kills us into the thing that entertains us?
That concept of sublimation is the absolute key to understanding human culture. By sublimating lethal combat skills, or by sublimating the sheer existential terror of death into a highly structured ceremonial movement, ancient societies accomplished two vital psychological tasks.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, they were able to maintain and glorify the masculine ideals of the warrior strength, agility, discipline, even during periods of extended peacetime. They kept the physical memory of survival alive.
That makes a lot of sense. You don't want the army getting soft.
Exactly. And second, and perhaps more importantly, they processed collective grief and existential terror within the safe, highly controlled, predictable confines of a social celebration.
Ah,
When you take the chaotic violence of a sword fight or a stick fight and you put it to a predictable musical rhythm, you are asserting human control over chaos. You are domesticating violence.
domesticating violence.
Yeah.
That's such a powerful way to frame it. But wait, I have a massive question about the Egyptian social structure here, and I want to push back on something.
Go for it.
If this physical movement, this dance, was so highly valued by society, like literally required by the gods for a safe trip to the afterlife, and used to train the very armies that protected the empire, why do all the historical sources explicitly say that no well-bred upper-class Egyptian would ever dance in public?
It is a paradox.
The sources note they left the actual performing entirely to the lower classes, to professional troops, and to slaves. If it's so holy and powerful, why wouldn't the pharaohs be out there dancing? That feels like a massive cultural contradiction.
It is a profound contradiction, and it's one we see perfectly mirrored in ancient Rome as well. There is a deep, pervasive moral tension regarding the body.
Explain that.
On one hand, you have the undeniable sacred utility of dance. The Roman state, for example, had a highly elite priesthood known as the
Leaping priests, right?
Yes, the leaping priests of Mars, the god of war. These were all high-born aristocratic patricians, and every march they performed a massive, choreographed war dance through the streets of Rome, violently clashing their spears against sacred figure-8-shaped shields to a very specific, driving triple-beat rhythm.
Sounds intimidating.
It was. The sheer noise and kinetic energy of this dance was believed to physically ensure the military success of the Roman legions that year.
Okay, so in that specific context, the elites did dance, but only in these very rigid, hyper-religious, deeply state-sanctioned ways that reinforced their own power.
Precisely. But the critical boundary was crossed the moment dance transitioned from a sacred duty or a martial exercise into theatrical entertainment.
Oh, I see.
Take the Roman pantomime, for instance, where a single actor would use incredibly complex signs, postures, and gestures to tell an entire mythic story without speaking a word. The moment the body was used simply to dazzle or entertain an audience, the societal standing of the performer absolutely plummeted.
Really, they hated entertainers that much.
Professional theatrical dancers in Rome were very often slaves imported from conquered territories like Greece or Spain. Now, these dancers were wildly famous. They were the celebrities of their day, highly sought after to perform at the lavish banquets of the rich.
Right. Everyone wanted them there.
But socially, legally, they were completely marginalized. They were considered infamia, essentially stripped of the legal protections of a standard Roman citizen.
So let me make sure I understand the psychology here.
Yeah.
If you are dancing to secure victory for the gods or the military, you are a hero. If you are dancing for the sheer pleasure or entertainment of a crowd, you are an outcast, a legal non-entity.
Exactly. Both the Romans and the Egyptians wrestled deeply with this. They intrinsically recognized the immense, almost hypnotic power of the human body in motion.
Right.
They knew it could move crowds to tears or whip them into a frenzy, but because they understood how powerful it was, they were deeply, deeply suspicious of anyone who wielded that power simply for their own gain or entertainment.
That makes total sense. They were afraid of it.
They kept the professional theatrical performer at arm's length to protect the rigid stability of their own social hierarchy. Because a body that moves completely freely is inherently dangerous to a strict society.
Okay, so the Egyptians and the Romans are essentially building a wall around professional dancers,
Yeah.
marginalizing them to keep that kinetic power in check.
Yep.
But if we look at the timeline, while Rome is busy marginalizing its dancers, ancient India goes in the exact opposite direction.
They completely flipped the script.
They don't just tolerate performance, they elevate it to the absolute highest realm of the divine. They didn't just respect it, they meticulously, scientifically codified it into a unified theory of human experience.
Yes.
I am talking, of course, about the Natya Shastra.
Yes. Natya Shastra is one of the most astonishing intellectual and artistic achievements in human history.
Correct me if I'm wrong on the timeline here, but the sources place the writing of this text somewhere between the 2nd century BCE and the 2nd century CE.
That's
written by the mythic sage Muni. And the origin story of this text alone tells you everything you need to know about how India viewed the profound necessity of dance and theater.
The mythological origin is incredibly revealing. According to Hindu mythology, the creator god Brahma was approached by the other gods with a massive social problem.
What was the problem?
The four existing Vedas, the sacred foundational texts of the cosmos, were only accessible to the upper castes, specifically the Brahmins who knew the complex Sanskrit language.
So the regular people were shut out.
Exactly. The lower castes, the vast majority of humanity, were entirely excluded from this vital spiritual knowledge and moral instruction. So Brahma decided to create a fifth Veda, the Natya Veda, by drawing the best elements from the other four.
Like a master compilation.
Yeah. He took recitation from the Rig Veda, song from the Samaveda, acting from the Yajur Veda, and aesthetic experience from the Atharva Veda. His explicit goal was to create a medium of spiritual instruction, theater, and dance that could be universally understood by everyone, absolutely, regardless of their caste, their literacy, or their native language.
He essentially invented theater as a universal spiritual technology. He bypassed the intellect and used the physical body to deliver divine knowledge.
And then he taught this system to the sage Bharata, who wrote it down.
And the sheer scope of this text, I was reading the breakdown in the sources, and it is staggering.
It is arguably the most comprehensive obsessive theater and dance manual ever produced in the world. We are talking about 36 incredibly dense chapters containing 6,000 poetic verses.
Wow.
It is an encyclopedia. It covers the optimal architectural construction of the theater space to ensure perfect acoustics, the mathematical scales of the music, the chemistry of the makeup, and most importantly, an unbelievably complex anatomical grammar of the human body.
Right. It outlines 108 karenas. And for you, the listener, a karena is basically the fundamental basic unit of dance movement, coordinating the hands, the feet, and the posture.
The building blocks.
Exactly. But it goes so much deeper than just where to put your feet. It outlines 36 distinct types of gaze. Just pause and think about the sheer observation required for that.
It's granular.
36 different, highly specific ways to look at someone, mathematically codified into a manual. And the mudras, the symbolic hand gestures. There are 24 specific gestures for a single hand and 13 for both hands combined.
It's basically a sign language for the soul.
But what blew me away is that the Natya Shastra isn't just a physical, technical manual. It is a deeply advanced psychological treatise.
This is where we get to the absolute revolutionary heart of the Natya Shastra, the theory of rasa and bhava.
Okay, let's break those terms down. Rasa translates roughly to essence, flavor, or sentiment. And bhava translates to emotional state or mood.
Yes. The core argument of the text is that the ultimate goal of a performance is never just to entertain the audience. The goal is to induce a transcendent, almost physically tangible emotional state in the spectator. The cultivated spectator is actually called the rasika, the one who tastes the emotion.
And there are 8 original primary rasas that the dancer is trying to cook up, right? Let me pull the exact list from the sources. We have the erotic, the comic, the pathetic or sorrowful, the furious, the heroic, the terrible, the odious or disgusting, and the marvelous.
Quite the spectrum.
Yeah. And then later on, centuries later, the tradition added a 9th, encompassing all of them, which is the tranquil. But how do they actually do it? Because the mechanics of how the dancer evokes these specific rasas in the audience sounds like pure psychological engineering.
It truly is emotional engineering. The dancer doesn't just go out on stage and pretend to act sad. They follow a highly rigid formula. First, they must internally manifest a stahi bhava, which is a dominant, permanent emotion that serves as the bedrock of the scene. But that's not enough. They then layer it with vibhavas, which are the determinants or the context, like the setting or the person they are reacting to.
Okay.
Then they add anubhavas, the involuntary physical actions, like a deliberate tremble of the lip or a specific smile. And on top of all of that, the manual outlines 37 transitory states. These are accessory, fleeting feelings like hope, doubt, jealousy, exhaustion, or longing.
So they have to balance all of that at once.
Yes, the dancer has to actively manipulate these 37 transitory states, letting them rise and fall like waves, to constantly support and feed that one main permanent emotion.
It's like a bartender mixing a highly specific, very dangerous emotional cocktail. You take a base of the heroic emotion, you add a splash of doubt from the transitory states, you garnish it with a specific gaze, and you serve it directly to the nervous system of the audience.
That is a perfect analogy.
And this entire massive philosophy is crystallized in this one famous dictum from the text. I love this quote. I actually wrote it down. Where the hand goes, eyes follow. Where the eye goes, there the mood follows. Where the mind goes, there arises the sentiment.
That quote is the master key to the whole system. It perfectly illustrates how the eye movements fundamentally alter and give true meaning to the hand gestures. A hand gesture alone, a single mudra, might simply represent the physical opening of a lotus flower. It's just a noun. But the eyes provide the critical context.
Yes, the source material gave this brilliant, vivid example of that. If the dancer is using their hands to depict a lotus flower, that flower is beautiful and fragrant, the dancer's eyes must express the sentiment of wonder and delight.
Right.
But if there is a highly venomous snake hiding inside the petals of that exact same lotus flower, the dancer uses the exact same hand gesture for the flower, but their eyes dramatically shift to express stark horror. The hands are the noun, but the eyes are the adjective.
If we compare this highly systemic approach to traditional Western acting, the philosophical difference is profound.
How so?
Well, for centuries, Western acting historically focused on the action, what the character is actively doing to achieve an objective. I want this, so I do that. But classical Indian Natya focuses intensely, almost exclusively, on the character's reaction to the action.
It's much more internal.
Exactly. It is an engineered, highly controlled psychological transfer from the body of the performer directly into the mind and soul of the audience.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though, because I have to push back a little on this system.
Let's hear it.
When I read this, I thought, if the actor is out there on stage, essentially doing incredibly complicated emotional math in their head, thinking, okay, I need to seamlessly combine movement number 42 out of 108 with accessory feeling number 12 out of 37,
Yep.
and apply gaze number 18, doesn't the performance just become incredibly rigid?
Right, this sounds mechanical.
Yeah, doesn't it become robotic, like plugging codes into a computer terminal?
Yeah.
How is there any humanity left in that math?
It's a completely fair question, and to a modern Western sensibility, it absolutely sounds paralyzingly rigid on paper. But what you have to understand to truly grasp Indian classical dance is the sheer, overwhelming level of mastery required.
Training must be intense.
Oh, it is. The training for forms rooted in the Natya Shastra takes years, very often a decade or more, of grueling daily repetition. The goal of that immense technical training isn't to make the dancer a robot. It is to drill the grammar so deeply into their muscle memory that it bypasses the conscious brain entirely.
So they don't even have to think about it anymore.
Exactly. It becomes second nature, like breathing. Once that physical framework is absolute, the dancer doesn't have to think about the math anymore. They achieve a profound, true freedom within the structure. The rigidity falls away, and it transcends into a deeply fluid, lived experience of rasa. In this philosophy, discipline isn't the opposite of freedom. The discipline actually creates the freedom required to channel the divine.
So you have to know the rules perfectly. You have to literally wire them into your nervous system before you can use them to bend reality.
That is beautiful.
It really is.
Okay, so while India is turning inward, spending centuries mapping the intricate geography of the human soul and the cosmos through this text, around this same era, the massive Chinese empires are utilizing the power of dance for a completely different purpose.
Yes, looking outward.
Right. They aren't just looking inward, they are fiercely looking outward. They are using dance as the ultimate diplomatic currency, and occasionally as a devastating weapon of statecraft.
The history of Chinese dance is fascinating because it starts, much like we discussed with prehistoric India, with raw, functional shamanic roots. Around 1000 BCE, during the Shang and early Zhou dynasties, you have magnificently costumed shamans wearing animal skins and elaborate masks.
And they were doing practical magic, basically.
Right, dancing frantically to induce rain during droughts or to draw heavenly spirits down to earth to heal the sick.
Praying for harvests, physically fighting off disease. Very practical, functional magic. Yes. But as the Chinese state became more centralized and bureaucratic, particularly by the Zhou dynasty, those raw, ecstatic, shamanic rituals get sanitized and codified into highly structured, elegant court ceremonies known as yayu.
They cleaned it up.
They take the unpredictable religious mimesis and turn it into a strictly controlled state ritual that reinforces the emperor's mandate of heaven.
But the era I really want to focus on is the Tang dynasty. Let's fast forward to the period running from 618 to 907 CE. The sources describe the Tang dynasty as a golden age, a period of unprecedented explosive cosmopolitanism.
Absolutely.
You have Emperor Xuanzong, who loves the performing arts so deeply that he actually establishes the Pear Garden Academy. He brings over 1,000 pupils directly into the palace to train in music, dance, and acting.
And because the Tang dynasty is so immensely wealthy and outward-looking, the Silk Road is absolutely booming. And we have to remember, the Silk Road wasn't just moving tangible commodities like silk, jade, and spices. It was a massive superhighway for culture. It was moving religion, music, and crucially, it was moving dance.
So they were importing new moves.
Big time. This is the era when we see a massive, highly fashionable influx of foreign culture pouring into the Chinese court. The elite Chinese nobility were utterly obsessed with anything exotic.
Which brings us to the Sogdian whirl.
Yes, the Huxuan Wu, which translates to the whirling barbarian dance.
The Sogdians were an ancient Iranian civilization, white Europoid traders from Central Asia, roughly modern-day Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. And they bring this specific dance to the cosmopolitan centers of China.
And it was a spectacle.
The sources describe it vividly. It featured young women, or sometimes boys, dressed in incredibly elaborate, colorful silk robes, spinning incredibly rapidly, round and round, either inside a designated circle or standing on a very small, intricate, round carpet.
It was visually mesmerizing. It required immense balance, core strength, and a sort of trance-like surrender to the momentum. It became an absolute sensation among the Chinese elite.
Everyone was doing it.
It was the defining cultural zeitgeist of the era. Even Emperor Xuanzong himself and his highly favored legendary consort, Yang Guifei, were avid practitioners of the Sogdian whirl.
It was literally the ultimate viral trend. Anyone in the Tang court had to know how to do the whirl. But here's where this story takes a crazy, dark twist.
A very dark twist.
There is a military general named An Lushan. He is of Sogdian Turkic descent, stationed on the empire's frontiers. And the historical texts describe him physically in a very specific way. They say he was a massive man, a very large, heavily overweight general.
Right.
But despite his massive size, An Lushan was an absolute undisputed master of the Sogdian whirl. He could skin faster and longer on this tiny carpet than anyone else.
Which is unexpected given his size.
Exactly. And he uses this incredible, unexpected physical skill to completely captivate Emperor Xuanzong and Yang Guifei. He dances for them. He literally dances his way into their most intimate, highly guarded inner circle.
He used his astonishing physical virtuosity to curry immense political favor. He bypassed the traditional, rigid, bureaucratic channels of the court entirely. Through dance, he became a trusted, beloved confidant of the emperor.
And we really need to unpack how that works. Because it's easy to say, he danced well, so they liked him.
Yeah.
But what is the actual mechanism there? How does spinning on a tiny carpet translate to military and political trust?
It comes down to shared somatic vulnerability.
Elaborate on that.
Well, dance requires physical stamina, coordination, and in the case of the Sogdian whirl, an ecstatic surrender. By performing this incredibly demanding, joyful dance in the intimate inner chambers of Emperor Xuanzong, An Lushan wasn't just politely entertaining, he was demonstrating a raw, hypnotic physical vitality.
Right, he was sweating with them.
Exactly. In a highly structured Chinese court that was governed by suffocatingly strict etiquette and protocol, the raw, dizzying kinetic power of the whirl completely bypassed the emperor's intellectual defenses. It created an atmosphere of ecstatic, shared vulnerability.
You intrinsically trust the person you sweat with.
You trust the person who breaks the stifling rules of court behavior and introduces an intoxicating shared physical freedom. And Lushan made the emperor feel alive, and in return, the emperor gave him power.
That makes perfect sense. It's like kinetic diplomacy. It's a bit like a modern foreign diplomat intentionally bypassing all the stiff official state dinners and instead taking a head of state on an extreme, grueling backcountry mountaineering trip.
Yes.
You share this raw physical exhaustion. You drop the bureaucratic armor. And in that space of shared physical vulnerability, the diplomat completely maneuvers themselves into the inner circle of power.
And once An Lushan has that power.
Right. Once he has their complete trust and the keys to the kingdom, he launches the An Lushan Rebellion in 755 CE.
Which was catastrophic.
And this wasn't a minor skirmish. It is a catastrophic, empire-shattering war that lasts for 8 agonizing years and completely devastates the Tang dynasty. The census numbers from the era suggest tens of millions of people vanished or died.
Unbelievable scale.
The Tang dynasty, one of the greatest empires in human history, never fully recovers its former glory. All because of a dance.
This deeply tragic story perfectly illustrates the profoundly porous and dynamic nature of cultural exchange. We tend to think of the Silk Road as just a safe, economic highway.
Just trading spices and silk.
Right, but the Sogdians didn't just bring goods. They brought an entirely different physical culture, a different way of moving through the world. That foreign physical culture was hungrily integrated into the Tang court, it enriched it, it thoroughly entertained the elite, and ultimately it provided the exact psychological vehicle for absolute destabilization.
It is incredible. It shows that dance is never, ever just neutral. When bodies move in space, especially foreign bodies moving in the center of a royal court, there's always, always power being negotiated. Power, diplomacy, and in this case, devastating subversion.
Exactly.
So the Tang dynasty aggressively embraced the new, the foreign, and the ecstatic, and it ultimately cost them their empire.
Yeah.
But if we jump forward centuries later to the West, we see a completely different kind of cultural crisis.
A crisis of rigidity.
Yeah. By the early 20th century, classical ballet in Europe and America had become the exact opposite of the ecstatic Sogdian whirl. It became so rigid, so deeply imperialistic, so smothered in corsets and strict rules that a new generation of artists felt completely trapped.
They needed a way out.
They realized the only way to move art forward was to aggressively look backward, all the way back to the primal, prehistoric roots we started our journey with.
Exactly. This era marks the explosive birth of primal modernism. You have this radical group of rebel dancers at the turn of the century who look at classical ballet and say, this is dead. This is artificial.
They wanted to tear it down.
They want to entirely dismantle the corseted, toe-shoe-wearing, gravity-defying rigidity of Victorian and Edwardian performance.
We're talking about the pioneers, sometimes affectionately referred to as the Isidorovals, people like Isadora Duncan, who's often crowned the mother of modern dance.
A true revolutionary.
I was looking at photos of her from the era in the sources, and it's jarring compared to traditional ballet. She aggressively rejects pointed shoes entirely. She dances completely barefoot in these loose, free-flowing, sheer Greek tunics.
No, corsets.
Right. She isn't trying to look like a mechanical doll. She's trying to mimic the organic movement of the wind, the crashing of the sea. She wants to return the human body to the natural, uncorrupted ideals of ancient Greece.
And then you have contemporaries like Ruth St. Denis, who starts boldly mixing contemporary dance steps with rich, complex mythologies borrowed from Egypt and India, desperately trying to escape the suffocating, puritanical prudery of the era.
These women were searching desperately for the profound connectedness of body and soul that they felt classical imperial ballet had completely severed. They wanted the body to be human again, heavy and real.
But the ultimate, most violent expression of this desperate return to the earth brings us right back to our opening hook.
Paris, May 29, 1913, the premiere of the Rite of Spring. So let's look at exactly how this riot was engineered. Because it wasn't an accident. Sergei Diaghilev, the brilliant dictatorial producer of the Ballet Russers Company, is on a mission. He doesn't just want to put on a nice, entertaining show for the Parisian elite. He wants to create a true Gesamtkunstwerk.
A Gesamtkunstwerk, the total work of art.
Right, let's unpack that term. It means an artwork where every single element, the music, the set design, the costumes, the movement, is completely unified into one overwhelming singular vision. It is total aesthetic immersion.
And to achieve this terrifying total vision, Diaghilev brings together an astonishing, once-in-a-generation team of collaborators.
The dream team.
Truly. You have Igor Stravinsky practically vibrating with nervous energy, composing this incredibly jarring, polyrhythmic, dissonant music that sounds like the earth cracking open.
This is wild music.
Then you have Nicholas Roerich, who is crucial here. Roerich wasn't just a theatrical set designer. He was a literal practicing archaeologist and a deep scholar of pagan antiquity.
Oh, wow, an archaeologist doing set design.
Yeah. Roerich dives headfirst into ancient Slavic folklore to design sets and heavy, woolen costumes that look exactly like prehistoric, tribal Russia.
And then the final piece of the puzzle. You have Vaslav Nijinsky, the greatest male dancer of his generation, tasked with doing the choreography. And Nijinsky decides to throw out the entire centuries-old ballet playbook.
He burns it down.
Instead of having his highly trained dancers float gracefully across the stage, constantly trying to defy gravity and look weightless, Nijinsky violently forces them to succumb to it. The dancers are hunched over. They are trembling. They are shuffling clumsily. Their legs are painfully turned inward.
We actually have the accounts of Marie Rambert, a dancer who was deeply involved in the gruelingly difficult rehearsals.
What did she say?
She noted that the intense, incredibly repetitive foot-stomping Nijinsky demanded wasn't just an arbitrary aesthetic choice. It was meant to literally represent the physical softening of the hard winter earth to ensure agricultural fertility.
Like physically pounding the soil.
Yes. Nijinsky was demanding a direct, unfiltered retrieval of ancient, primitive, functional ritual. He wanted them to dance like the prehistoric hunters at Bimbetka.
But the Parisian audience in those velvet chairs wasn't ready for a prehistoric ritual. The premiere happens, the bassoon plays, the dancers stomp, and as we discussed earlier, absolute violent mayhem ensues.
The riot.
Now, after the initial shock wears off, after the duels are fought and the theater is cleaned up, what actually happens to this undeniable masterpiece of modern art? It vanishes. It completely disappears.
It's tragic, really.
Nijinsky, who is in a tempestuous romantic relationship with Diaghilev, impulsively gets married to a woman while the ballet company is on tour in South America. Diaghilev finds out, flies into a jealous, vindictive rage, and fires Nijinsky on the spot, effectively exiling him from the ballet world.
And tragically, without the grounding structure of the ballet company, Nijinsky's fragile mental health rapidly deteriorates shortly after. He suffers a severe breakdown and spends the next 3 decades of his life in various psychiatric institutions.
That's so sad.
And because this is 1913, and dance is inherently ephemeral, there is no reliable video recording, no standardized way to easily write down movement this complex. His groundbreaking, riot-inducing choreography was completely, seemingly permanently lost to history.
For over 50 years, nobody in the world knows how to actually perform the original Rite of Spring. People play Stravinsky's music all the time, but the dance is a ghost.
Until 1971.
Yes. A choreographer named Robert Joffrey of the Joffrey Ballet and a brilliant dance historian named Millicent Hodgson decide they aren't going to accept that it's gone. They decide they're going to find it. They essentially become kinetic archaeologists.
The sheer dedication of this search is astounding. It takes them 16 agonizing years of research. They travel the globe chasing phantoms.
16 years?
They track down Nicholas Roerich's son in India just to decode the obscure pagan symbols painted on the original costumes. But the real, almost impossible miracle was finding the actual choreography, the physical steps.
Yes. It is like an Indiana Jones movie, but for dance.
Mm-hmm.
Remember Marie Rambert, the dancer who was at the original 1913 rehearsals?
Right.
She had made highly meticulous, incredibly detailed notes on her own personal piano score while Nijinsky was shouting out the steps. But she had misplaced the notes, and she couldn't find them while she was alive.
Such a loss.
Hodgson is desperately searching for this score. And years after Rambert has died, they miraculously find her original, annotated piano score hidden away inside an old wardrobe. It's like finding the holy grail of modern art.
Incredible luck.
And finally, in 1987, after 16 years of piecing together clues, the Joffrey Ballet meticulously reconstructs and performs the original piece. And when modern audiences saw it, it definitively proved to the world that Nijinsky hadn't just made a weird ballet, he had mathematically created the first truly modern dance.
And that raw, primal energy that Nijinsky tapped into inspired a massive wave of successors. Look at the legendary choreographer Pina Bausch. In 1975, she staged her own terrifyingly visceral version of the Rite of Spring.
Oh, I've seen clips of this.
She didn't just have dancers stomp on a wooden stage. She had the entire stage floor covered in a thick layer of actual, literal peat dirt. The dancers, both men and women, wore simple, thin white slips or bare chests.
And it gets messy.
Very. As the grueling piece progressed, as they threw themselves to the floor, they became absolutely filthy. They were sweat-streaked, gasping for breath, completely physically exhausted by the end of it. The dirt stuck to their skin.
I read in the sources that Bausch explicitly asked her dancers during rehearsals, how would you dance if you knew you were going to die? And they danced exactly like their lives depended on it.
Which brings me back to the riot itself. Now that we know the deep history, I want to ask, why did that 1913 audience react with actual physical violence? It wasn't just bad manners or snobbery about classical music.
Great. Why throw a chair?
The reaction was deeply subconsciously psychological. I have to look at the context. Nijinsky's visceral, primeval movements violently, aggressively stripped away the polite, highly refined, deeply artificial veneer of Edwardian society.
The timing is huge here.
Remember the date? This is May 1913. This is barely 1 year before the horrific outbreak of World War I. Europe is sitting on a massive, unstable powder keg of geopolitical anxieties, rapid industrialization, and colonial tension.
So they were already stressed.
Deeply. The audience in that theater desperately wanted a neat, pretty mathematical distraction. Instead, Nijinsky forced them to confront the raw, terrifying, ugly reality of ancient human sacrifice, of mob violence, and of their own suppressed primal nature.
Wow.
The stomping, heavy, pigeon-toed dancing body held up a mirror that they simply could not bear to look into.
I really want the listener to stop and think about that. I want you to ask yourself, what would it actually take for a piece of art, a live performance, to make you stand up and throw a chair today?
It's hard to imagine now.
We are so deeply desensitized. We have CGI movies showing planets exploding. We have infinite access to horrific violence on the internet. We have hyper-realistic video games. But the fact that a group of people stomping their feet on a stage caused a riot shows how deeply, fundamentally physical movement dictates our psychological comfort zones.
It completely bypassed their highly educated intellects and hit their central nervous system directly.
Exactly.
This profound realization brings us to a crucial pivot in the history of 20th century movement.
Okay, where are we pivoting?
Well, while Nijinsky, Stravinsky, and Roerich were desperately imagining a prehistoric, pagan past to shock European audiences out of their complacency, other brilliant artists realized something even more profound.
What's that?
They realized that ancient, deeply spiritual, functionally powerful dance traditions weren't just artifacts of the past. They didn't need to be imagined. They were still alive, they were breathing, and they were fundamentally shaping the modern world if you were brave enough to know where to look.
Enter Katherine Dunham. If you are listening to this and you don't know her name, you immediately need to look her up.
An absolute legend.
Katherine Dunham, who lived from 1909 to 2006, was an absolute force of nature. I was looking through her biography in our source stack, and I was floored. She wasn't just a brilliant dancer, she was a fiercely intelligent anthropologist, academically trained at the University of Chicago.
A true academic.
And she completely, single-handedly revolutionized how the Western world understood and respected the dances of the African diaspora.
Her methodology was revolutionary. In 1935, funded by a prestigious Rosenwald Fellowship, Dunham didn't just go to Paris to study ballet. She traveled deep into the Caribbean, specifically to Haiti, to conduct rigorous ethnographic research on Haitian Vodou ceremonies.
That's intense fieldwork.
And she didn't just go as a detached clinical observer taking notes from the back of the room. She sought to deeply assimilate. She actually underwent formal baptism into the Vodou religion specifically to gain the trust of the community and gain access to sacred inner sanctum ceremonies she would have otherwise been entirely excluded from.
Her fieldwork was incredibly rigorous. Imagine doing this in 1935. She is hauling heavy equipment through the heat of Haiti, documenting these highly complex ceremonies using fragile wax cylinder audio recordings.
It's amazing any of it survived.
The sources we have note that 40 of these original wax cylinders remarkably still exist in archives today. And as she is recording the music, she's meticulously anatomically categorizing the different physical movements, linking them directly to the specific religious cults within the Vodou tradition.
The physical distinctions she noted and translated are fascinating from a biomechanical standpoint.
All right, like what did she find?
For example, she deeply documented the Rite cult. The Rite dances involved beautifully flowing, undulating movements heavily concentrated in the upper back and the shoulders.
Why specifically the back and shoulders?
Well, she noted why they moved this way. These dances were specifically designed to represent deities, or La, like Agwe, the spirit of the sea. So the movements physically mimicked the rolling, continuous waves of the ocean.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Or they represented Asaka, the spirit of agriculture and the earth, where the dancers bent low, deeply grounded, moving as if they were planting crops in the soil.
Water and earth. Fluid, deeply connected, flowing movements.
Exactly. But then she violently contrasted that with her documentation of the Petu cult. The Petu dances featured a completely different physical vocabulary. They utilized a stiff, rigid back, intensely trembling shoulders, and incredibly rapid, highly complex, aggressive footwork.
A totally different vibe.
They embodied a completely different, volatile energy. Historically, the Petu rites are deeply tied to the immense trauma of the transatlantic slave trade and the fierce, fiery spirit of the Haitian slave rebellion. The physical tension in the dance literally holds the historical tension of the people.
And what makes Dunham a genius is what she does next. She doesn't just write a dry academic paper about this and leave it in a library in Chicago.
No, she brings it to the world.
She takes all of this profound, sacred anthropological data, and she synthesizes it. She weaves it together into what becomes globally known as the Dunham technique. It is a groundbreaking, continuous, polyrhythmic dance style that seamlessly combines the strict, elevated lines of classical European ballet with the deep, grounded, incredibly complex isolations of these African and Caribbean movements.
Which was completely unheard of at the time.
And then, armed with this revolutionary technique, she takes it straight into the belly of the beast, Hollywood.
This is where her work transitions from pure anthropology into absolute artistic activism. She and her company were hired to work on major mainstream Hollywood films, most notably Stormy Weather in 1943 and Casbah in 1948.
But we have to talk about the massive friction she faced here.
Yeah.
Because she was dealing with 1940s Hollywood studio executives.
Oh, the studio system was brutal.
These producers didn't care about the Rite cult or anthropological accuracy. To them, she was just providing background entertainment. They explicitly demanded something they lazily called exotic, colorful, and primitive to put in their movies to sell tickets. They just wanted a flashy spectacle.
Yet, in the face of immense pressure and profound systemic racism, Dunham absolutely refused to compromise the physical integrity of the movements she had studied.
She held her ground.
Even when the studio executives forced her to perform to standard Hollywood jazz tracks or sweeping orchestral arrangements instead of traditional drumming, she secretly choreographed the highly authentic, exact representations of Vodou biomechanics directly into the scenes.
It's so subversive.
If you watch her famous sequence in Stormy Weather, right beneath the glamorous Hollywood veneer, you can clearly see her dancers executing the precise, undulating shoulder and back isolations that are the hallmark of the Rite dances.
And in Casbah, she goes even further, right?
She boldly introduces the highly specific nervous energy and the exact physical mechanics of actual spirit possession onto the silver screen. You see the dancers doing the sudden, violent jerking, the intense shaking, a simulated but highly accurate loss of physical control as the spirit mounts the dancer.
It's absolutely brilliant. What she did is essentially anthropological smuggling. It is like a brilliant Trojan horse, but elevated.
Trojan horse is the perfect term.
She gives the Hollywood producers the flashy, glamorous jazz numbers they demanded to satisfy their commercial desires. But secretly, underneath the glitter, she is delivering a profound, historically accurate, spiritually dense anthropological cipher to millions and millions of moviegoers across the world. The executives just saw jazz, but the diaspora, and anyone who knew the movements, felt the cipher.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Katherine Dunham's legacy is truly monumental. She wasn't just inventing a fun new dance style for the movies. She was actively, aggressively using dance as a tool for racial justice and historical validation. By taking these specific, deeply meaningful, previously stigmatized movements from the Caribbean and putting them onto the glamorous silver screen with intense dignity and technical perfection, she proved definitively that Black cultural practices belonged completely in the high art realm.
She legitimized it on a global scale.
She was visually, kinesthetically connecting African Americans to the global majority, validating the rich, unbroken, highly sophisticated heritage of the African diaspora.
She essentially forced the Western world to recognize the immense intellectual and spiritual sophistication of these traditions. She wouldn't let them be dismissed as just primitive.
Never.
And that specific fight, the exhausting fight to legitimize, document, and preserve the ephemeral movements of the past, has evolved today into a massive, globally coordinated, highly bureaucratic effort.
Which brings us perfectly to our final source domain for today's deep dive, the modern international framework of preservation. Specifically, we are looking at the monumental 2003 UNESCO Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage.
For a very long time, centuries really, when humanity thought of the word heritage, we almost exclusively thought of static, immovable monuments. We thought of big, heavy rocks.
Right, buildings.
The Great Pyramids, the Roman Colosseum, Stonehenge, the Cathedral of Notre Dame. If you could touch it and it was old, it was heritage.
But the 2003 UNESCO Convention marked a massive, badly needed global paradigm shift. It officially, legally recognized that human heritage isn't just stone and physical artifacts.
Exactly.
The most vital parts of our history are living, breathing cultural practices. It is the oral storytelling, the complex vocal songs, the seasonal rituals, and crucially, the incredibly fragile art of traditional dance.
Because if a building burns down, you might have the blueprints to rebuild it. But if the last master of a specific 2,000-year-old dance dies and they never taught their apprentice, that entire library of human movement is just completely irrevocably gone.
It vanishes forever.
Let's look at the incredible, mind-boggling diversity of what UNESCO is actually trying to preserve right now. Just looking at the list from India alone is staggering.
Oh, India has so much.
In 2023, they officially inscribed Garba from the state of Gujarat, which is this incredibly vibrant, cyclical, devotional dance that explicitly honors feminine divine energy. You have Sankirtana from Manipur, which encompasses deeply sacred drumming and dancing. You have the Chow dance from eastern India, which beautifully and fiercely blends raw martial arts techniques with vibrant local folklore.
And we absolutely cannot forget forms like Mudiyattu.
Yes, Mudiyattu. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Mudiyattu is a breathtaking ritual dance drama from Kerala. It vividly enacts the epic mythic battle between the divine goddess Kali and the terrifying demon Durika. The entire community comes together to physically prepare the performance space, drawing massive, intricate images of the goddess on the floor with colored powders.
Wow, it's a huge community effort.
The dancers undergo elaborate face painting and wear massive headgear. It is a total communal purification ritual disguised as theater. And then, perhaps most remarkably regarding sheer endurance, you have forms like Kutiyattam, also from Kerala. This is an over 2,000-year-old Sanskrit theater tradition. The physical and mental training required just to be allowed to perform it is unfathomable to most modern people.
How long does it take?
It takes 10 to 15 years of grueling daily training, heavily focused on mastering the intricate microscopic eye and hand gestures, exactly much like we discussed earlier with the rigorous demands of the Natya Shastra.
And this massive preservation effort isn't just isolated to one country trying to protect its own borders. The sources talk extensively about the Ramayana cultural sphere in Southeast Asia. This concept is absolutely fascinating to me.
It's a great example of cultural spread.
The ancient Indian Hindu epic, the Ramayana, this massive story of princes, demons, and monkey gods, was voluntarily adopted and localized all across Southeast Asia centuries ago.
It is a perfect, beautiful, historical example of non-coercive cultural transmission. It wasn't spread by the sword.
Right, nobody forced them to take it.
As the story of Rama moved slowly across the ancient trade routes, alongside merchants and monks, each distinct region fell in love with the story. But they actively adapted the physical, kinesthetic telling of the story to perfectly reflect their own local values and aesthetics.
So you look at Cambodia, and you get the incredibly elegant, slow-moving Apsara dance, where the dancers are hyperextending their fingers in postures that trace directly back to the manuals of the Natya Shastra.
Exactly.
Then you travel to Thailand, and the exact same story is told through the Khan masked dance, which has a completely different, highly stylized, almost martial kinetic energy.
And then you look at Indonesia, and you have the Ramayana Jawa.
Which is just incredible to think about, because Indonesia is today a predominantly Muslim country, yet the people there lovingly, fiercely preserve and perform this ancient Hindu epic as a completely core, non-negotiable part of their own cultural identity.
And what is remarkable today is that this deeply shared ancient dance heritage actually serves as a highly effective tool for modern geopolitical diplomacy.
Like politically.
Yes. The shared physical language of the Ramayana is frequently invoked and utilized as a cultural bridge for political and economic unity among the diverse ASEAN nations. When politicians can't agree on trade, they can at least sit together and watch the same mythic dance they all share.
Okay. So what does this all mean? I have to ask the difficult, maybe slightly cynical question here about all this preservation.
Go ahead.
We talked way earlier about the Egyptian tatib. We marveled at how it evolved completely naturally over thousands of years, from a highly lethal combat skill in 2600 BC into a joyful, celebratory wedding dance today. It changed because the people changed. Their needs changed.
Right, it adapted organically.
Doesn't slapping a highly bureaucratic UNESCO intangible heritage label on a dance artificially stop its natural organic evolution? Are we intervening too much? Are we just building pristine, lifeless glass museums for things that are fundamentally supposed to be living, breathing, and changing?
That is the central, deeply fraught debate among anthropologists today. It is the ultimate double-edged sword of globalization and UNESCO recognition.
That's a tough balance.
On one hand, the bureaucratic recognition is often a desperate triage. It legally and financially protects these incredibly fragile dances from dying out completely in the face of aggressive, modern cultural homogenization and the internet. It provides crucial funding, international prestige, and status to marginalized master performers.
But on the other hand, you are exactly right.
It risks the very real dangers of commodification, standardization, and freezing.
Right. They stop being spiritual rituals and just become expensive tourist traps.
Exactly. Local, hyper-specific dances that once functioned as deeply intimate, sacred rituals designed to bring rain, or communal mechanisms to process localized grief, risk being frozen in an artificial state of authenticity.
They lose their soul.
When they are inscribed by UNESCO, they can sometimes be reduced to mere folklore, performed on a strict 7:00 p.m. schedule for paying tourists in hotel lobbies, entirely stripped of their original, terrifying spiritual utility.
That's depressing.
However, the grim reality is that the alternative is often letting them vanish into the ether entirely. The heritage framework, imperfect as it is, shouldn't be viewed as a glass museum case designed to trap a butterfly.
How should we view it?
Rather, it is a profound global recognition that the human body itself is the ultimate, most sacred repository of memory. We don't just store history in books. We are the archive.
The body is the archive. I absolutely love that. So let's take a breath and recap this incredible, massive journey we've been on today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We started by looking at the desperate survival rituals painted onto the cave walls of Bhimbetka 10,000 years ago, where early humans danced to negotiate with the wild. We traced the martial and funerary rhythms of the Egyptian Nile, where lethal combat sublimated into beautiful celebration.
We saw the entire emotional cosmos meticulously mathematically codified in the brilliant psychology of India's Natya Shastra.
We witnessed the raw, hypnotic power of dance, used as a devastating diplomatic weapon on the Silk Road, leading directly to the tragic fall of the Tang dynasty. We felt the cultural earth shake and the velvet chairs fly in Paris during the violent rioting birth of primal modernism in 1913.
We followed the brilliant Katherine Dunham as she undertook grueling anthropological fieldwork,
bringing the deep spiritual mechanics of Haitian Vodou straight into the commercial heart of Hollywood to fiercely fight for racial justice and cultural validation.
And finally, we looked at the modern, highly complicated, desperately important fight to keep these intangible, living heritages alive through the massive frameworks of UNESCO.
The historical through line here is absolutely undeniable. Dance is not, and has never been, just an aesthetic byproduct of human civilization. It is the very scaffolding that holds the civilization up.
It's how we survive.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with this thought. The very next time you are at a crowded concert or a wedding, or even just standing in your kitchen, and you find yourself unconsciously tapping your foot to a beat, or getting completely lost in the rhythm of a moving crowd,
Remember that feeling.
remember that you are not just having a fleeting moment of fun. You are actively participating in a 10,000-year-old, unbroken, deeply necessary chain of human communication. The human body is the oldest, most profound archive we have ever created.
Beautifully said.
But here is the final provocative question you need to ponder tonight. For 10,000 years, humanity has fundamentally relied on physical movement, on the smell of sweat, on heavy breathing, on the vulnerability of sharing tangible physical space with other moving bodies, to process our deepest grief, to celebrate the divine mysteries, and to actively maintain our cultural memories.
We needed each other.
But look at how we live today. We are moving deeper and deeper at breakneck speed into an increasingly sterile digital age. We are living more and more of our waking hours as completely disembodied avatars on glowing screens, swiping and scrolling with our thumbs instead of stepping, spinning, and sweating with our entire bodies.
That's a huge shift.
So what happens to our intangible cultural heritage when the only tangible part we have left, our physical bodies, are left sitting idle in ergonomic office chairs for 12 hours a day? If we entirely stop moving together in the chaotic, messy physical world, what vital ancient parts of our shared human soul will we simply forget how to express?
Will we even know how to riot?
Will the next great cultural riot that shifts the paradigm happen in a theater full of moving bodies? Or will we eventually become too disconnected from our own physical archives to even feel the music playing right in front of us? Think about it. We will catch you on the next deep dive.